Hello, Midnight Traveler. Welcome back to the Midnight Explorer, where we journey through time's forgotten corridors and uncover the stories that shaped our world. Tonight, we're traveling far, very far. Back through corridors of sand and time to a place where human ambition touched the stars. Close your eyes if you'd like. Let the world fall away, because tonight, we're going to Egypt. Not the Egypt of postcards and tourist buses, but the Egypt of whispers, the Egypt of secrets carved in stone. Tonight, we ask, what were the pyramids really for? The desert remembers. Imagine, if you will, standing in the desert at dawn. The year doesn't matter yet. It could be today. It could be 4,000 years ago. The desert, you see, doesn't care much about time. It simply exists, patient and eternal, watching civilizations rise like morning mist and fade like evening shadows. The air is cool against your skin, that particular coolness that only exists in the hour before sunrise, when the world holds its breath between darkness and light. Sand stretches endlessly in all directions, painted in shades of deep purple and blue. And then, slowly, the horizon begins to glow, not with the harsh brightness of midday, but with something gentler, something that feels almost like hope. And there, emerging from the fading darkness like memories made solid, you see them. The pyramids. Even now, even after everything humanity has built, our towers of steel and glass, our bridges spanning impossible distances, our machines that can think and dream, the pyramids stand as perhaps the most profound mystery our species has ever created. They don't just exist in space, they exist in the imagination. They are questions made of limestone and granite, riddles that have outlived empires. But here's what we often forget in our rush to explain them, to categorize them, to reduce them to engineering problems solved. The pyramids were built by people. Not mystical beings from distant stars, not lost advanced civilizations with technology beyond our understanding, but people. Human beings with calloused hands and tired backs. People who loved and laughed and dreamed. People who looked up at the stars and wondered, just as we do now, what it all meant. And that, perhaps, is the first secret of the pyramids. They are human. Before the stones. To understand the pyramids, we must first understand Egypt before the pyramids. We must travel back to a time when these monuments didn't exist, when the Giza Plateau was just another stretch of desert, and the Nile, that great green snake of life, flowed through a land still discovering itself. Picture Egypt in the year 3500 BCE. The world is young, or so it feels. Agriculture, that revolutionary human experiment, has taken root along the Nile's banks. Every year, like clockwork, no, more reliable than any clock, the river rises. It swells with waters from distant mountains that the Egyptians will never see, carrying with it rich, dark silt. This silt, this gift from the gods, transforms the desert's edge into the most fertile land imaginable. Where the flood reaches, life explodes. Wheat grows tall and golden, barley ripples in the breeze like waves on an emerald sea. Date palms cast long shadows. Children play in irrigation channels while their parents work the fields, their hands deep in mud that smells of creation itself. But where the flood doesn't reach, there is only sand. The demarcation is sharp, almost violent in its clarity. On one side, green, life, possibility. On the other, ochre, death, eternity. The Egyptians noticed this, of course. How could they not? They lived on the edge between two worlds, between the realm of the living and the realm of the forever. In these early years, Egypt is not yet Egypt as we know it. It is not one nation, but many small kingdoms, each centered around a town or temple. Hierakonpolis in the south, Nakada along the Middle Nile, Buto in the Delta. These places have their own rulers, their own gods, their own stories. But stories, like rivers, have a way of flowing together. The people of this pre-dynastic Egypt bury their dead simply. They dig shallow graves in the desert sand just beyond the reach of the annual flood. The bodies are placed on their sides, knees drawn up as if sleeping, as if they might wake at any moment. Around them, they place simple offerings, clay pots filled with grain, stone tools, perhaps a favorite necklace or hunting bow. Something remarkable happens in these desert graves. The hot, dry sand naturally preserves the bodies. The moisture is drawn out so quickly that decay barely has time to begin. The dead remain themselves. Their skin becomes leathery but intact, their features recognizable, their hair still their own. This accidental mummification must have seemed like magic to those early Egyptians. The desert, it seemed, could grant a kind of immortality. The dead placed in the sand didn't disappear. They remained, patient and waiting, their bodies intact, while seasons turned and the Nile rose and fell. Is it any wonder, then, that the Egyptians began to believe in an afterlife? When they could see with their own eyes that death wasn't quite ending? When their ancestors seemed merely to be sleeping in the warm sand, waiting?
The first king. Around 3100 BCE, something changes. The small kingdoms begin to unify, drawn together by trade, by war, by the simple logic that cooperation brings advantages that isolation cannot match. The process is neither quick nor peaceful. There are battles, alliances broken and remade, betrayals whispered in palace corridors. But eventually, gradually, two main kingdoms emerge. Upper Egypt in the south, where the Nile runs through a narrow valley between desert cliffs, and Lower Egypt in the north, where the river spreads into a fan of fertility before meeting the Mediterranean Sea. And then, in a moment that will echo through 3,000 years of history, these two kingdoms become one. The king who achieves this unification, whether through conquest or diplomacy, or some combination of both, will be known by many names: Narmer, Menes, the first pharaoh. But whatever name we use, the significance is the same. For the first time, Egypt is not just a land, but an idea, a nation, a civilization with purpose and direction. Imagine being alive in that moment. Imagine living in a world that has suddenly grown larger, more complex, more full of possibility. Your village, which once answered to a local lord, now owes allegiance to a distant king who rules over both the desert and the delta, who wears a crown combining the white of the south and the red of the north. It must have felt like the dawn of time itself. With unification comes ambition. The new pharaoh needs to demonstrate power, to legitimize rule, to create symbols that say, this is different now, this is the beginning of something that will outlast us all. And so, as civilizations do, they begin to build. The early royal tombs are impressive but modest by later standards. They're built at Abydos in the desert west of the Nile, in that liminal space between the living and the eternal. These are rectangular structures made of mud brick, their walls decorated with geometric patterns. Inside, chambers hold grave goods, furniture, jewelry, weapons, jars of wine and oil. And sometimes, though this detail is often left out of casual tellings, these tombs hold retainers, servants and officials who were, it seems, sacrificed or who chose to follow their king into death. Their smaller graves surround the royal tomb like satellites around a star, creating in death the same hierarchy that existed in life. We might find this practice horrific now, but to the ancient Egyptians it made a terrible kind of sense. If the afterlife was real and the preserved bodies in the desert suggested it was, then didn't a king need his court, his advisors, his cupbearers, and scribes? This practice won't last long. Within a few generations, the Egyptians will find a better way, not to sacrifice the living, but to create eternal servants from stone and clay, to build an afterlife through art and architecture, not rather than blood. But we're not there yet. For now, in these early days of the first dynasty, Egypt is still learning what it means to be Egypt, still discovering what symbols and structures can carry meaning across the threshold of death. The desert watches, the Nile flows, and somewhere in the mind of some unknown architect, a shape is beginning to form, a structure unlike anything the world has yet seen, a pyramid. The step pyramid rises. Now we move forward through time, not far, just a few generations, but in those generations much changes. The first dynasty gives way to the second, and the second gives way to the third. Each pharaoh learns from the last, each tomb becomes slightly more elaborate, each symbolic gesture slightly more refined. And then, around 2670 BCE, a king named Djoser takes the throne. Djoser will not be remembered as Egypt's greatest warrior or its wisest ruler, but he will be remembered, oh how he will be remembered, because during his reign something impossible becomes possible. During his reign, the first pyramid rises from the desert floor. But let's not rush to that moment. Let's linger first with the man who will make it happen, Imhotep. Imhotep is Djoser's vizier, his right hand, his chief architect. In later centuries, he will be deified, worshipped as a god of wisdom and medicine. But for now, he is simply a man with an extraordinary mind, standing in the desert and imagining something that has never existed. Try to see him there. The desert wind pulls at his linen kilt, sand works its way into his sandals. Behind him, workers, thousands of them, move like a human river, carrying stones, mixing mortar, following the plans that exist for now only in Imhotep's imagination. The structure that is rising at Saqqara, on the west bank of the Nile across from Memphis, the capital, is not what Imhotep originally planned. Like all great works, it evolves in the making. It begins as a traditional mastaba, a flat-topped rectangular tomb, the same type that pharaohs have been using for generations. But Imhotep looks at this mastaba and thinks, not enough. This structure will be buried, forgotten, lost to the sands of time like everything else. It needs to be taller, grander. It needs to reach upward, to catch the eye from miles away, to stand against the sky like a challenge to mortality itself. And so he makes a decision that will change architecture forever. He builds another mastaba on top of the first, and another, each level smaller than the one below, creating a structure that rises in 6 great steps toward the heavens. the step pyramid. When it is finished, the structure stands nearly 200 feet tall. Nothing like it has ever existed before, not in Egypt, not anywhere. Workers and priests and common people come from all over Egypt to see this impossible thing, this mountain made by human hands. But the pyramid itself is only part of Imhotep's vision. Around it he creates an entire complex, courtyards and chapels, ceremonial buildings with engaged columns, columns attached to walls, the very first columns in Egypt's architecture. And here's what's remarkable. Much of this complex is fake, not in the sense that it doesn't exist, but in the sense that it's not functional. There are doors carved in limestone that can never open, rooms that can never be entered, buildings that are solid stone shaped to look like structures with interiors. Why? Because this complex isn't really for the living, it's for the dead. It's for Djoser's Ka, his life force, his spirit, to use in the eternal afterlife. Djoser will need a place in the next world, courtyards for ceremonies, shrines for rituals, and so Imhotep builds them, permanent and eternal, in stone. This is the crucial innovation, the revolutionary idea that will drive all pyramid construction to come. The afterlife is real and it needs real things. The king will need a body, hence mummification, belongings, hence grave goods, a place to live, hence the tomb complex, and food and drink, hence the offerings. But more than that, the king will need monuments that declare to the cosmos itself, this person mattered, this person's name will not be forgotten. On the night the step pyramid is completed, imagine standing in the desert darkness. The moon is new, the stars spread across the sky like scattered salt, and there, blocking out a section of those stars, is a shape, a shadow darker than the night around it, a mountain that wasn't there yesterday, wasn't there in your grandfather's time, wasn't there in any time before now. It must have felt like magic, like the world itself had shifted on its axis. The Egyptians have learned something profound. They can build eternity. They can take stone and sweat and vision and create something that will outlast them all, something that will still be here when their grandchildren's grandchildren have turned to dust, when their cities have crumbled, when their very names have been forgotten by everyone except the desert wind. The step pyramid of Djoser is not the end of this story. It's barely the beginning. But it's the proof of concept. It's the moment when an abstract idea, the idea that death can be defeated through architecture, becomes tangibly, undeniably real. And once you've seen it done, once you know it's possible, how can you not try to do it better?
The geometry of eternity. After Djoser's step pyramid, Egypt enters a period of experimentation. The pharaohs who follow him all want their own monuments, their own mountains, their own ways of touching the sky. But they want to improve on what came before. They want to reach higher, build stronger, create something even more eternal than eternity itself. The next major attempt comes during the reign of Pharaoh Sneferu, around 2600 BCE. Sneferu is ambitious, more ambitious than perhaps any pharaoh before him. He doesn't build one pyramid, he builds three. And in the building of these three pyramids, the Egyptians will make every mistake they need to make, learn every lesson they need to learn, to finally create the perfect form. The first is the pyramid at Midam. It begins as a step pyramid like Djoser's, but Sneferu decides midway through construction to fill in the steps, to create smooth, sloping sides. The result should be magnificent, a true pyramid, its sides rising cleanly to a point. But something goes wrong. Maybe the foundation isn't stable enough. Maybe the angle is too steep. Maybe the techniques for creating smooth sides aren't yet perfected. Whatever the reason, the Midam pyramid partially collapses, its outer casing stones sliding away, leaving a stepped tower emerging from a hill of rubble. You can visit it today, this failed monument. The locals call it El Haram El Kadab, the false pyramid. It rises from the desert like a warning, a reminder that even divine kings can fail, that stone can betray, that ambition must be tempered with understanding. But Sneferu doesn't give up. He begins another pyramid at Dashur in the desert south of Cairo. This one starts well. The angle is steep, about 54 degrees, and the structure rises cleanly, powerfully, its sides smooth and perfect. But then, about halfway up, something changes. Maybe the architects realized that the steep angle creates too much internal pressure, that the weight of the upper stones will crush the chambers below. Maybe they hear worrying sounds from within the stone, the groaning of stressed limestone. Maybe they're just afraid, remembering Midam's collapse. Whatever the reason, they make a decision. They reduce the angle. The top half of the pyramid rises at a gentler 43 degrees. The result is the bent pyramid, a structure that looks like it changed its mind halfway through. It's oddly endearing, this imperfect monument, this physical record of human uncertainty frozen in stone. It says, we're learning, we're figuring this out, we're not gods, we're architects doing our best in the face of an impossible task. But the bent pyramid, for all its honesty, isn't what Sneferu wants. It isn't perfect, it isn't eternal, it's a compromise, and compromise is not the language of the divine. And so Sneferu builds a third pyramid. This one, also at Dashur, learns from all the mistakes. The angle is gentler from the bottom up, the same 43 degrees that worked for the top half of the bent pyramid. The foundation is more solid, the techniques are refined, and this time, it works. The red pyramid, named for the rosy color of its limestone in certain light, rises clean and true, its sides perfect slopes, its point touching the sky exactly as intended. It is the world's first true smooth-sided pyramid. The proof that the form works, the template for everything that will come after. Standing in the desert between the bent pyramid and the red pyramid, both built by the same pharaoh, is a moving experience. You can see the learning, the evolution right there in stone. You can see human determination, the refusal to accept failure, the belief that perfection is possible if you just keep trying. This is not alien technology. This is not lost wisdom from vanished civilizations. This is humanity at its most human, making mistakes, learning, adapting, trying again. This is us, figuring things out one stone at a time. By the time Sneferu dies, he has built more stone monuments than any pharaoh before him. More stone, in fact, than was used in the Great Pyramid itself. He has transformed pyramid building from an art into a science. He has created the blueprint. And his son, inheriting both a kingdom and this hard-won knowledge, will take that blueprint and create something so perfect, so precisely executed, so impossibly magnificent, that it will become one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. His son's name is Khufu, and his pyramid will be great.
The Great Pyramid awakens. Close your eyes and imagine this moment with me. It's the year 2580 BCE. The world is ancient and young at the same time. Writing exists, but most people don't know how to read. Cities exist, but most people have never traveled more than a few miles from where they were born. The wheel exists, but the Egyptians don't use it much. The Nile is their highway, and boats are more practical than carts. Khufu has been pharaoh for just a few years. He is the son of Sneferu, the man who built 3 pyramids, the man who learned through trial and error how to make the impossible possible. Khufu has grown up watching these monuments rise, has spent his childhood among architects and stonemasons and engineers. He knows what his father achieved, and he wants to surpass it. The location he chooses is Giza, a limestone plateau on the west bank of the Nile, about 10 miles south of where the delta begins. It's a good choice, a perfect choice, really. The bedrock is solid, the plateau is elevated above the floodplain, and, most importantly, it's close to Memphis, Egypt's capital, close enough that the pharaoh can oversee construction personally. The architect, we don't know his name, history has not preserved it, but somewhere in the dusty archives of time there should be a statue, a temple, a city named in his honor. This anonymous genius begins by surveying the site. He needs to find true north, because the pyramid will be aligned with the cardinal directions with an accuracy that won't be matched until the age of modern instruments. How does he do it? We think he uses the stars. Perhaps he builds a circular wall and watches the stars wheel overhead, marking where they rise and where they set, finding the axis point of the sky's rotation. Or perhaps he uses the sun, marking shadows throughout the day, finding true east and west, and deriving north from that. The methods are simple, but the patience required is immense. This is astronomy as architecture, mathematics as religion. Once he has his orientation, he levels the site. Not approximately, but perfectly. The base of the Great Pyramid is leveled to within less than an inch across its entire 13-acre footprint. Think about that. With no lasers, no transits, no modern surveying equipment, ancient engineers created a base that is flat enough to satisfy modern construction standards. They probably used water channels, filling trenches cut into the bedrock and marking the water level as it naturally settles into perfect horizontal. Simple, elegant, effective. And then, once the site is prepared, the real work begins. The pyramid will be massive, not just big, massive in a way that defies comprehension. The base will cover 13 acres. Each side will be 756 feet long. The height will be 481 feet. The structure will contain approximately 2.3 million blocks of stone, each weighing between 2 and 80 tons. To put that in modern terms, the Great Pyramid contains enough stone to build a wall around France. If you broke it up, you could build a small city. If you laid all its stones end to end, they would stretch almost 2/3 of the way around the Earth. And all of this, all of it, will be placed by human hands. The work begins in Akhet, the season of inundation when the Nile floods and field work is impossible. Farmers from all over Egypt come to Giza, not as slaves. Contrary to popular belief, slaves did not build the pyramids, but as workers fulfilling their labor obligation to the pharaoh, their god-king, their living deity. Imagine being one of these workers. You're a farmer from some small village in Middle Egypt. You've never seen the capital before, never seen a pyramid. You arrive at Giza and the sight steals your breath. Thousands of workers, tens of thousands. A temporary city has sprung up around the construction site. Houses, bakeries, breweries, workshops. The smell of fresh bread mixes with stone dust and sweat. Commands are shouted in a dozen regional dialects. The air vibrates with purpose. And the pyramid itself, already rising, already massive though it's not yet half finished. You can feel its presence like a physical weight, this mountain growing stone by stone, this impossibility becoming real. You are assigned to a gang. Each gang has a name, usually something like Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkaure. There's rivalry between gangs, pride in the work, a sense of camaraderie born of shared effort toward a common goal. Graffiti has been found inside the pyramid, messages from these gangs, their names painted on stones in red ochre, as if saying, "We were here. We did this. Remember us." Your gang is responsible for moving stones from the quarries to the pyramid. The quarries are nearby. The pyramid is being built from its own plateau. The architects cutting into the bedrock and using those very stones for the lower courses. It's elegant, this self-building monument, this structure eating the desert to create itself. The stones are massive, but you have techniques. You work in teams of 20, 30 men. You use wooden sledges pulling the stones over tracks that you keep wet. Some researchers think they used water. Some think milk mixed with oil, anything to reduce friction. You chant as you pull, not songs of misery, but work songs, rhythms to coordinate effort, to make many bodies move as one. Recent archaeology has revealed something beautiful. The workers were well fed. Not just adequately fed, but well fed. Cattle bones have been found in the workers' villages, evidence of meat rations. Bread, beer, vegetables in abundance. The pharaoh understood something crucial. You cannot build a monument to eternity with starving, beaten slaves. You build it with strong backs and willing hearts, with people who believe in what they're creating. As the pyramid rises, the work becomes more complex. The ramps, we think they used ramps, though their exact form is debated, must spiral around the structure or rise alongside it. Each new course of stone requires more effort to place than the last. The stones must be positioned with millimeter precision. The sides must maintain their perfect angle. The whole structure must stay balanced and true. Inside, as the pyramid grows, they're creating chambers and passages. The grand gallery rising at a steep angle, its corbelled ceiling a masterpiece of engineering. The king's chamber with its granite walls, granite quarried at Aswan, 500 miles south, and somehow transported to Giza. The stress-relieving chambers above the king's chamber, their massive granite beams protecting the room below from the crushing weight of millions of tons of stone above. The sarcophagus in the king's chamber must have been placed during construction. It's too large to fit through the passages, which means the entire pyramid was built around it. Think about that. The most sacred object, the final resting place of the god-king's body, was positioned first, and then, and only then, the mountain of stone was raised around it. Years pass. A generation grows up knowing nothing but pyramid building. Children who were born when the foundation was laid are teenagers by the time the structure tops out. The pyramid becomes not just a building, but a way of life, an organizing principle for society, a shared dream made stone. And then, finally, after perhaps 20 years of constant work, the last block is set. The pyramidion, the capstone, perhaps covered in gold.
The secret's within. Now we must go inside. We must descend into the darkness, into the heart of stone, and confront what the pyramids were really meant to hold. But before we enter, a moment of honesty. The Great Pyramid was robbed,
long ago. Perhaps in ancient times, perhaps during periods of chaos when royal authority broke down and desperate people ransacked the tombs of the god kings. We don't know exactly when, we don't know who, but we know that when archaeologists first entered the pyramid in the 9th century CE, the sarcophagus was empty. The treasures were gone. The mummy was gone. Everything the pyramid was built to protect, everything, had been taken. There's something heartbreaking about this. All that effort, all that stone, all that belief in eternity, and in the end, thieves with crude tools and desperate hunger defeated it all. The pyramid couldn't save Khufu from oblivion. It couldn't protect his body, couldn't preserve his name in the way the Egyptians believed was necessary for the afterlife. Or couldn't it? Because here's the thing. We know Khufu's name. 4,600 years later, we still speak it. We still tell his story. Millions of people know who he was, have seen his monument, have wondered about his life and death and dreams. If the goal was immortality, in a strange way, it worked. Just not in the way the ancient Egyptians expected. But let's enter the pyramid. Let's walk the passages that were sealed for thousands of years, meant never to be walked again after Khufu's funeral. The original entrance is on the north face, about 55 feet above ground level. Why north? Because in Egyptian religion, the northern stars, the imperishable stars that never set below the horizon, were associated with the afterlife. The pharaoh's spirit was supposed to ascend to the sky and join these eternal stars. You enter and immediately descend. The passageway is narrow, just 3.5 feet square, and slopes down at a 26-degree angle. You have to crouch, almost crawling, stone pressing close on all sides. If you're claustrophobic, this is where you realize you've made a terrible mistake. The descending passage continues for over 300 feet, cutting first through the pyramid itself and then into the bedrock below. This subterranean chamber is mysterious. It was clearly started but never finished. The floor is uneven. A pit has been dug in one corner, leading nowhere. Was this supposed to be Khufu's burial chamber originally? Did the plans change? We don't know. But at some point in the passage system, there is an ascending corridor. In ancient times, this was hidden behind a granite plug, sealed so perfectly that early explorers bypassed it. When the pyramid was broken into, probably during the 9th century, the thieves couldn't remove the granite plugs, so they tunneled around them through the softer limestone. The ascending passage climbs at the same angle that the descending passage fell. It rises through the pyramid's heart, through millions of tons of stone, and it leads to the Grand Gallery. The Grand Gallery is, there's no other word for it, magnificent. The passage suddenly soars upward, its corbelled ceiling rising in 7 steps to a height of 28 feet. It's 153 feet long and feels like a cathedral, like a church built for giants. Your footsteps echo, the stone walls seem to press inward despite the height. You feel the weight of the pyramid above you, the crushing, impossible weight of 2.3 million stones. Why is the Grand Gallery so large? It's far bigger than it needs to be for people to pass through. One theory is that it housed the granite plugs that would seal the passage after Khufu's burial. Another theory is that it had religious or ceremonial significance, that it represented the ascension to heaven, the climb from the earthly to the divine. Or perhaps, and this is just speculation, just imagination, perhaps it's large simply because it could be. Because after all the cramped passageways and narrow shafts,
The architects wanted to create a moment of awe. They wanted anyone entering the pyramid to be reminded that this was not just a tomb, but a house of eternity, a place where the normal rules of space and scale didn't apply. At the top of the Grand Gallery, you reach the King's Chamber. This is the heart of the pyramid, the reason for everything. The room is exactly twice as long as it is wide, a 10 to 20 cubit ratio, a deliberate proportion. Numerology made architecture. The walls and floor are red granite from Aswan, not limestone. 9 massive granite beams form the ceiling, each weighing about 50 tons. And above the King's Chamber, invisible to anyone standing in it, are 5 more chambers. Stress-relieving chambers designed to distribute the weight of the pyramid so it doesn't crush the King's Chamber. The highest of these chambers has a pointed roof directing the tremendous pressure outward toward the sides of the pyramid. It's engineering brilliance, ancient builders understanding principles of load-bearing and stress distribution that wouldn't be formally described until thousands of years later. In the center of the King's Chamber sits the sarcophagus. It's made of a single block of granite, its corners perfectly square, its sides perfectly smooth. It's slightly too large to have been brought through the passage system, which means, as mentioned before, it was placed during construction. The sarcophagus is empty now. It probably was when most of recorded history was happening, but standing beside it, you can imagine. You can picture the day when Khufu's mummified body was carried up through these passages, when priests performed the opening of the mouth ceremony, when the sarcophagus lid was sealed, when the passages were blocked, when the pyramid was closed forever. Or so they thought. There are also narrow shafts running from the King's Chamber and another chamber below it, called the Queen's Chamber, though it probably wasn't for a queen. These shafts run at angles through the pyramid and emerge at the exterior. For a long time, archaeologists thought they were air shafts, meant to ventilate the chambers during construction. But then someone noticed they point toward specific stars. The south shaft from the King's Chamber points towards Orion's belt. The northern shaft points towards the polar stars. In Egyptian religion, Orion was associated with Osiris, god of the afterlife, and the polar stars were the imperishable realm where the pharaoh's spirit would dwell. These aren't air shafts. They're soul shafts. Symbolic passages for Khufu's Ka to ascend to the heavens. The pyramid isn't just a tomb. It's a machine for resurrection. It's a vehicle for the journey from mortality to eternity. Every angle, every measurement, every passage and chamber serves a purpose in this journey. The pyramid is a 3-dimensional religious text, its meaning written in stone and geometry and astronomical alignment. To understand it fully, you would need to understand Egyptian religion, astronomy, mathematics, and architecture all at once. You would need to think like someone who believed, truly believed, that death was not an ending, but a transformation, and that the proper rituals and structures could ensure that transformation went smoothly. Standing in the King's Chamber, in the heart of the pyramid, you're standing at the center of an ancient attempt to solve the greatest mystery humanity has ever faced. What happens when we die? The pyramid is their answer, carved in 6 million tons of stone. We continue, we endure, we become eternal. The pyramid complex. But the pyramid itself is only part of the story. To understand what these monuments really meant, we need to step back outside into the desert sun and look at everything that surrounds them. Each pyramid is the centerpiece of a vast complex. Let's continue with the Great Pyramid as our example, but know that this pattern repeats with variations for all the major pyramids. On the east side of the Great Pyramid, there's a mortuary temple. This is where offerings were made to Khufu's spirit. Daily offerings of bread, beer, meat, incense, where priests performed rituals to sustain the pharaoh in the afterlife. The temple is mostly gone now, its fine limestone blocks having been quarried away centuries ago to build medieval Cairo, but we can trace its outline. We can see where its walls stood, where its altars were positioned. From this mortuary temple, a causeway, a covered corridor about half a mile long, once descended eastward toward the Nile. This causeway was enclosed, its walls decorated with reliefs showing Khufu's achievements. Walking through it must have been like walking through a story, the pharaoh's life told in stone images on either side. At the end of the causeway, at the edge of the cultivation, where the desert meets the green, stands the Valley Temple. This is where Khufu's body would have been received when it arrived by boat from the embalmers, where the first rituals would have been performed, where the transition from life to death officially began. The Valley Temple of Khufu is largely buried now, lost beneath the modern village of Nazlat el-Saman, but if we could excavate it fully, we would find massive granite columns, alabaster floors, courtyards open to the sky. We would find another chapter in the architecture of eternity. And around the Great Pyramid, there are subsidiary pyramids. 3 small ones on the east side, probably for Khufu's queens. To the south, there are boat pits, long trenches cut into the bedrock, sealed with massive limestone slabs. In 1954, one of these boat pits was opened. Inside, disassembled but perfectly preserved, was a cedar wood boat 143 feet long, the Khufu ship. It was carefully removed, piece by piece, and reassembled. You can see it today in a museum near the pyramid, its graceful lines still elegant after 4,600 years. Why was it there? We're not certain. Perhaps it was the boat that carried Khufu's body to his tomb. Perhaps it was meant for the pharaoh to use in the afterlife to sail across the sky with the sun god, Ra. Perhaps both. The Egyptians believed the sun traveled across the sky in a boat by day and through the underworld in a boat by night. A pharaoh would need his own boat for this eternal journey. There are also mastaba tombs, flat-topped rectangular tombs arranged in neat rows around the pyramid. These are for the nobility, for high officials who earned the privilege of being buried near their pharaoh. Even in death, the hierarchy of Egyptian society is maintained. The king at the center, his courtiers arranged around him like constellations around the pole star. To the south of the Great Pyramid stands the Pyramid of Khafra, Khufu's son. It's slightly smaller than his father's, but appears taller because it's built on higher ground and retains some of its smooth casing stones at the apex. Standing between them, you can see the family resemblance, the shared geometry, the continuation of an architectural language from one generation to the next. And next to Khafre's Valley Temple crouches the Sphinx. The Great Sphinx of Giza is carved from a natural outcrop of limestone left over from the quarrying operations. It has the body of a lion and a human head, traditionally said to be Khafre's face, though this is debated. It's massive, 240 feet long and 66 feet high. And it's ancient even by pyramid standards, weathered by thousands of years of wind and sand. The Sphinx faces east, toward the rising sun. Between its paws, there's a stela, a stone tablet, placed there by Pharaoh Thutmose IV, almost 1,000 years after the Sphinx was carved. The stela tells a charming story. When Thutmose was a prince, he fell asleep in the Sphinx's shadow while hunting. In his dream, the Sphinx spoke to him, asking to be freed from the sand that was burying it. In return, the Sphinx promised Thutmose would become pharaoh. When Thutmose woke, he cleared the sand and, indeed, became pharaoh. What's remarkable about this story is that it shows the Sphinx was already ancient and mysterious in Thutmose's time, already being swallowed by sand, already a relic from a lost age. The Sphinx has been buried and uncovered multiple times throughout history. For much of the medieval period, only its head was visible, sticking up from the sand like a strange stone dream. Napoleon's army saw it mostly buried. It wasn't fully excavated until the 20th century. There's something poignant about this, the way that even the ancient Egyptians' monuments couldn't resist time, couldn't stop the desert from reclaiming them. The sand doesn't care about human ambition. It doesn't care about pharaohs or priests or pyramids. It simply does what sand does. It drifts, it accumulates, it buries. But humans care. We keep coming back, keep digging, keep uncovering, keep trying to understand. The Sphinx is cleared of sand now, fenced and protected, visited by millions. We won't let it be buried again. We've taken on the task the ancient priests could no longer perform. We maintain these monuments. We preserve them. We insist that they matter. To the south of the Sphinx and Khafre's pyramid stands the Pyramid of Menkaure, Khafre's son. It's much smaller, only about half the height of the Great Pyramid. Perhaps by this point the immense expense and effort of pyramid building was becoming unsustainable. Perhaps religious ideas were shifting. Perhaps Menkaure simply had a different vision. Together, these three pyramids, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, form the iconic image we all carry in our minds when we think of Egypt. They're arranged in a roughly diagonal line, their angles and proportions in harmony, creating a composition that feels both planned and natural, like mountains that happen to grow in perfect geometric forms. Some researchers have suggested they're aligned with the stars of Orion's belt, reflecting the constellation on Earth. This theory is controversial, debated, probably unprovable, but whether it's true or not, there's something appealing about the idea that the Giza Plateau is a mirror of the heavens, that the pyramids are stars made solid, that the pharaohs wanted to create a correspondence between earth and sky so perfect that the boundary between them would dissolve. Who built them? Now we must address a question that has spawned 1,000 conspiracy theories, 1,000 pseudoscientific documentaries, 1,000 books filled with speculation masquerading as fact. Who built the pyramids? The answer that some people don't want to hear, because it's less exciting than aliens or Atlanteans or lost supercivilizations, is this. Egyptians built the pyramids. Ancient Egyptians, using the tools and techniques available to them in the Bronze Age, with organization, ingenuity, determination, and an enormous amount of hard work. But let's be more specific. Let's talk about who these people were, because the reality is far more interesting than any conspiracy theory. First, let's dispel the most persistent myth. The pyramids were not built by slaves. Not by Hebrew slaves fleeing Egypt in the Exodus, which, incidentally, is not supported by archaeological evidence and likely didn't happen as described in the Bible. Not by masses of oppressed workers driven by whips and cruelty. We know this for several reasons. Archaeological excavations at pyramid building sites, particularly at Giza and at the Pyramid of Senuseret II, have uncovered workers' villages. These settlements show how the pyramid builders lived, what they ate, how they were treated. And what we find is surprising. These workers were relatively well off. Their villages had copper workshops, breweries, bakeries. They ate meat regularly, cattle, sheep, goat, which was expensive and usually reserved for elites. Their bread was made from quality grain. They drank beer, which was safer than water, and nutritious. When workers were injured, and many were because pyramid building was dangerous work, they received medical care. Skeletons show healed fractures, successful amputations, even crude but effective surgical interventions. Someone cared enough about these workers to mend their broken bones, to try to save their lives. The workers were organized into gangs, with names like Drunkards of Menkauri, or Friends of Khufu, or Victorious Gang. These names were found written in red ochre on stones deep within the pyramids, graffiti left by the workers themselves. There's pride in these names, humor, identity. Recent analyses suggest the workforce might have been divided into a permanent core of skilled workers, stonemasons, engineers, architects, and a rotating population of less skilled laborers who worked during the agricultural off-season. When the Nile flooded and farming was impossible, tens of thousands of workers from all over Egypt would come to the pyramid sites, fulfilling their labor obligation to the pharaoh. This wasn't slavery. It was a form of taxation, yes, but also a form of participation in the greatest national project imaginable. These workers were building the house of eternity for a living God. They were ensuring the cosmic order would be maintained. They were, in a very real sense, saving the world. We can trace where they came from through pottery styles and dietary evidence. Workers came from Upper Egypt, from the Delta, from everywhere in between. The pyramid construction sites were melting pots, places where Egyptians from distant regions met and worked together toward a common purpose. The logistics alone are staggering. At peak construction, the Great Pyramid might require 20,000 to 30,000 workers on site. All of these people needed to be fed, housed, organized, equipped. Water had to be provided. In the desert, this is not trivial. Tools had to be manufactured and maintained. Copper chisels dulled constantly against limestone and had to be resharpened or replaced. The organizational capacity required to manage this is almost as impressive as the pyramid itself. There had to be a bureaucracy, scribes tracking supplies, overseers managing work gangs, administrators coordinating between the quarries and the construction site and the agricultural centers providing food. This is civilization working at its peak. This is human cooperation on a scale that had never been attempted before. The pyramids are not just architectural achievements, they're social achievements. They represent the ability of a society to organize itself around a single monumental goal and maintain that organization for decades. The tools they used were simple but effective. Copper chisels for cutting softer limestone, dolerite pounders, hard stone hammers for granite, wooden wedges that were inserted into cracks and then soaked with water. As the wood swelled, it split the stone. Copper saws with quartz sand as an abrasive for cutting through hard stone. We found these tools. We found the workshops where copper was smelted and shaped. We found the grinding stones where chisels were sharpened. We found the remains of the wooden sledges used to transport stones. And through experimental archaeology, actually trying to move and shape stones using ancient techniques, we've proven it's possible. Difficult, yes. Time-consuming, yes, but possible. You don't need impossible technology. You need knowledge, patience, and a lot of people working together. The question, how did they do it, has largely been answered. The remaining mysteries are mostly details, the exact design of the ramps, the specific techniques for placing the casing stones, the method of achieving the pyramid's precise astronomical alignment. But the bigger question, the more interesting question, is not how, but why. Why did the Egyptians dedicate so much of their civilization's resources to these monuments? Why did they consider it worthwhile to spend decades building a single tomb? To answer that, we need to understand how the ancient Egyptians saw death and how the pyramids fit into their spiritual worldview.
The theology of stone. In ancient Egyptian belief, death was not an ending, but a transition. A dangerous transition, admittedly, full of challenges and potential pitfalls, but a transition nonetheless.
The goal was to reach the field of reeds, a paradise that was essentially Egypt, but perfected, where the harvests were always abundant, where the sun always shone, where you would be reunited with loved ones who had passed before. But reaching the field of reeds required several things to happen correctly. First, your body had to be preserved. The Egyptians believed you had a ka, a life force or spirit, and a ba, often depicted as a bird with a human head, representing personality or soul. After death, the ka and ba needed to reunite with the body periodically. If the body decayed beyond recognition, this reunion couldn't happen, and he would be lost forever. Hence mummification, the elaborate 70-day process of removing organs, drying the body with natron salt, wrapping it in linen. The goal was to create a preserved body that would last forever, a permanent anchor for the spiritual aspects of the person. Second, you needed your name to be preserved. In ancient Egyptian belief, to speak someone's name was to keep them alive. To erase someone's name, to chisel it off monuments, to destroy their tomb inscriptions, was to kill them more thoroughly than any weapon could. This is why pharaohs who fell out of favor had their names systematically removed from historical records. It was an attempt to murder them retroactively, to erase them from existence itself. The pyramid, with its inscriptions and reliefs, ensured the pharaoh's name would be preserved in stone, literally carved into eternity. Third, you needed your sustenance. The dead still needed to eat and drink, at least symbolically. This is why offering chapels were attached to tombs, why priests made daily offerings of bread and beer and meat. But the Egyptians, practical people, knew that these offerings might not continue forever. Dynasties fall. Temples are abandoned. Priests die and are not replaced. So they developed a backup plan: magical substitution. If you painted food on the tomb walls, it could sustain you. If you carved images of servants preparing bread and beer, those images would magically come to life in the afterlife and actually provide sustenance. The art in Egyptian tombs isn't just decoration. It's functional. It's survival equipment for the dead. Fourth, you needed to pass judgment. The most famous scene from Egyptian funerary literature shows the weighing of the heart. The deceased's heart is placed on a scale opposite the feather of Maat, the goddess of truth and order. If your heart is heavier than the feather, if you've lived an unjust life, a monster called Ammit devours you and you cease to exist. But if your heart balances with the feather, if you can recite the negative confession, a list of sins you haven't committed, if you pass the various trials, then you're welcomed into the eternal realm. The pyramid helps with all of this. It preserves the body by housing it in an impregnable stone chamber. It preserves the name through inscriptions. It provides magical sustenance through carved offering tables and images. And it helps the spirit navigate the afterlife through its symbolic architecture. Later pyramids, starting with the pyramid of Unas at the end of the 5th dynasty, even have inscriptions carved into their interior chambers. The pyramid texts, the oldest religious texts known to humanity. These are spells, incantations, descriptions of the journey the pharaoh's spirit must make. They're guidebooks for the dead, GPS coordinates for eternity. One of the pyramid texts reads, "I am a spirit in the sky. I live as I desire. I rise to the sky as a falcon." Another, "The sky is cleared, the ground is made firm for me, for I am one who constructs pyramids." These texts are not meant for the living to read. They're meant for the dead pharaoh, for his ka to read as it navigates the challenges of the afterlife. The pyramid is a book, its passages chapters, its chambers verses in a poem about transcending mortality. In this context, the massive scale of the pyramids makes perfect sense. This isn't ostentatious display or egotistical excess. This is insurance. This is an attempt to ensure, through sheer durability, through overwhelming presence, through unambiguous permanence, that the pharaoh will successfully reach the afterlife. And because the pharaoh is a living god, because his successful transition to the afterlife maintains cosmic order, because his spirit will intercede with the gods on behalf of Egypt, ensuring his eternal survival isn't a personal vanity project. It's a national security priority. It's the most important thing society can do. This is why a civilization would dedicate a significant portion of its GDP to building these monuments. Not because pharaohs were tyrants demanding monuments to themselves, although some undoubtedly were, but because the entire society believed, genuinely believed, that these pyramids were necessary, that without them chaos would reign, that the Nile might not flood, that Ma'at, the cosmic order, would collapse. The pyramids are, in essence, incredibly elaborate prayers. They're a physical manifestation of hope that death is not final, that consciousness persists, that love and memory and identity can outlast the body's decay. They're humanity shouting into the void, "We matter. Remember us. We were here." And the remarkable thing, the truly extraordinary thing, is that it worked. Not in the way the ancient Egyptians intended, perhaps. Khufu's body is gone. His Ka and Ba, if they exist, have had to find their own way. But his name echoes through millennia. His monument still stands. He is remembered. The prayer was answered, just not by the gods the Egyptians prayed to.
The Pyramid Age fades. After the 4th dynasty, the age of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, something changes. The 5th and 6th dynasty pyramids are smaller, less carefully constructed. They're made with a rubble core held together by a limestone casing rather than solid, massive blocks throughout. They look impressive when completed, but without the casing stones, they collapse into shapeless hills. Why the decline? Several factors probably contributed. First, the enormous expense. Building the Great Pyramid required mobilizing and feeding a significant percentage of Egypt's population for 2 decades. That's sustainable for a generation or two when the economy is strong and the Nile floods reliably, but it's not sustainable indefinitely. Second, theological changes. The sun god Ra becomes increasingly central to Egyptian religion. Pharaohs begin building sun temples alongside or instead of pyramids. The focus shifts from the pyramid as a vehicle for resurrection to the sun as the key to eternal life. Third, the growing power of the nobility and priesthood. In the early dynasties, the pharaoh is absolute, but over time, power becomes more distributed. The nobility demands larger tombs, more resources dedicated to their own afterlives. The priests accumulate wealth and land. The centralized control that made massive pyramid construction possible begins to erode. By the end of the 6th dynasty, around 2180 BCE, Egypt enters what historians call the First Intermediate Period, a time of fragmentation and chaos. The Old Kingdom, the Pyramid Age, is over. For about 150 years, Egypt has no strong central government. Multiple pharaohs claim authority. Famine strikes. The texts from this period are dark. The river of Egypt is empty. Men cross over it on foot, one laments. The land turns around as does a potter's wheel. When Egypt reunites under the Middle Kingdom, around 2050 BCE, pyramid building resumes, but it's different. The pyramids are smaller, built primarily of mud brick with a stone casing. They're cheaply constructed and haven't weathered well. Most have collapsed into unrecognizable mounds. Yet the tradition persists. The idea of the pyramid as the proper tomb for a pharaoh remains powerful. Even as the construction becomes less grand, even as the resources available decrease,
Egyptian kings continued to build pyramids for another 1,000 years. The last pyramid built in Egypt dates to around 1550 BCE, more than 1,000 years after the Great Pyramid. And these late pyramids are tiny, almost pathetic compared to the Fourth Dynasty giants. The Pyramid of Amos at Abydos is only about 30 feet tall. It's made of sand and rubble held together with a stone casing. It's more symbolic than functional, a gesture toward a tradition that has outlived its ability to be fully realized. After the New Kingdom begins, pyramid building stops entirely in Egypt. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom, famous names like Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Ramesses II, are buried in the Valley of the Kings, in tombs carved deep into the mountainside, hidden and theoretically protected from robbers. But the pyramid tradition doesn't die. It migrates south, to Nubia, where the Kingdom of Kush adopts Egyptian culture wholesale. The Nubian kings build pyramids for their tombs, smaller and steeper than the Egyptian ones, but clearly descended from the same tradition. Over 200 Nubian pyramids still stand in modern Sudan, a forgotten echo of the Egyptian originals. Mysteries that remain. Despite everything we know, and we know quite a lot, the pyramids still hold mysteries. Not the fantastical mysteries of alien construction or Atlantean technology, but genuine archaeological and engineering puzzles that keep researchers up at night. The void in the Great Pyramid. In 2017, using muon detectors, which sense cosmic rays through stone, researchers discovered a large void above the Grand Gallery. It's at least 100 feet long. Is it a structural feature, relieving stress on the Grand Gallery? Is it an undiscovered chamber? Is it just an irregularity in the construction? We can detect it, but we can't access it without damaging the pyramid. The door in the Queen's Chamber shaft. In 1993, a robot explored the southern shaft of the Queen's Chamber and found a limestone door with copper handles. In 2002, a robot drilled through it and found another door. What's behind the second door? We still don't know. The investigation is ongoing, constrained by the need to preserve the monument. The internal ramps. How exactly were the stones raised as the pyramid grew taller? External ramps would need to be enormous, longer than the pyramid itself, and we've now found no evidence of them. Internal ramps are one theory, but we haven't found definitive proof. The exact method remains debated. The construction timeline. Can a pyramid containing 2.3 million stones really be built in 20 years? That's about 12 stones per hour, all o'clock, every day for 2 decades. It's possible, but it requires extraordinary organization and efficiency. Some researchers think the timeline must be wrong, that construction took longer. Others have demonstrated through experiments that the rate is achievable with enough workers and good management. The acoustic properties. Some researchers have noticed that certain chambers in the pyramids have unusual acoustic properties. The King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid, for instance, has a resonant frequency. Was this intentional? If so, why? Were certain rituals meant to be performed with sound as a component? The mathematical relationships. The dimensions of the Great Pyramid encode several mathematical relationships. The ratio of its perimeter to its height is very close to 2 pi. Is this intentional, suggesting the ancient Egyptians knew about pi? Or is it a coincidence arising from their construction methods? Scholars debate this intensely. The alignment precision. How did the ancient Egyptians achieve such precise alignment with the cardinal directions and certain stars? We have theories, using shadow tracking, using circumpolar stars, but we're not certain of the exact methods. And the precision is remarkable. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north within 1/15 of a degree. That's better than most modern buildings achieve without modern instruments. These mysteries keep the pyramids alive in our imaginations. They prevent us from thinking we fully understood, fully explained, fully mastered these ancient monuments. They remind us that the past is genuinely foreign, that people 4,000 years ago thought differently than we do, prioritized different things, perhaps knew different things. The pyramid in imagination. But beyond the archaeological mysteries, there's another pyramid. the pyramid of human imagination, the pyramid as symbol, as metaphor, as a repository for all our hopes and fears about the ancient world. The pyramid conspiracy theories began almost as soon as Europeans encountered these monuments. In medieval times, some believed the pyramids were Joseph's granaries, built to store grain during the 7 years of plenty described in the Bible. The fact that the pyramids are solid stone apparently didn't deter this theory. In the 19th century, as archaeology became more scientific, new theories emerged. Some claimed the Great Pyramid encoded all human knowledge, that its dimensions predicted future events, that it was a monument to a lost universal wisdom. A whole field of pyramidology developed, blending mathematics, religion, and wishful thinking. The 20th century brought alien theories. Erich von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods popularized the idea that ancient monuments like the pyramids were built with extraterrestrial help. This theory persists despite the total lack of evidence and the fundamentally insulting implication that ancient Egyptians couldn't possibly have been smart or capable enough to build these things themselves. Why are we so drawn to these theories? Why do people want to believe the pyramids are more mysterious than they are? Perhaps because we need mystery. In our modern world where so much is known, mapped, explained, where Google can answer any question in milliseconds, we crave something that resists complete understanding. We want there to be secrets, hidden knowledge, lost wisdom. And perhaps because we have trouble accepting the full implications of human achievement. The pyramids make us uncomfortable because they demonstrate that greatness doesn't require modernity, that ancient peoples, without computers or machinery or even iron tools, could create something we struggle to fully comprehend 4 millennia later. This threatens our sense of progress, our assumption that we are automatically superior to those who came before us simply because we came later. The pyramids stand as proof that sophistication, intelligence, and capability are not uniquely modern traits. But I would argue that accepting the human origins of the pyramids makes them more wonderful, not less. An alien civilization with advanced technology building pyramids would be interesting, sure, but it wouldn't be meaningful. It wouldn't tell us anything about ourselves, about what we're capable of, about the heights human creativity and determination can reach. But Egyptians building the pyramids, that's profound. That's a story about what people can do when they work together toward a common goal. When they believe in something larger than themselves, when they're willing to dedicate their lives to a project they'll never see completed. The pyramids are a testament to human cooperation on a scale we rarely achieve. They're proof that ordinary people, organized extraordinarily well, can reshape the world itself. So what can we, in our modern world, learn from these ancient monuments? First, the importance of maintenance. The pyramids that survive best are the ones that were cared for continuously. The Great Pyramid retained its casing stones for thousands of years because it remained religiously significant, because people kept the sand cleared, because it was maintained. When maintenance stopped, when Islam became Egypt's dominant religion and the old temples were abandoned, the casing stones were quarried away to build Cairo. Our own great works won't survive without active preservation. No structure is eternal by itself. Eternity requires human choice, requires people in each generation deciding that something matters enough to protect. Second, the value of collective effort. We live in an age that celebrates individual achievement, the lone genius, the singular hero. But the pyramids weren't built by lone geniuses. They were built by thousands of people working together. The architect needed the quarrymen. The quarrymen needed the farmers who fed them. The farmers needed the Nile to flood. Everything was interconnected. Our greatest achievements today, likewise, require enormous collective effort. The pyramids remind us that humans are at our best when working together, not alone. Third, the power of belief. The Egyptians built the pyramids because they believed, truly, deeply believed in the afterlife and in the divine nature of the pharaoh. Whether or not those beliefs were true in any objective sense, the belief itself was powerful enough to move millions of tons of stone. What we believe shapes what we build. What we think is important determines where we invest our resources. If we believe in only individual wealth, we build gated communities and private islands. If we believe in knowledge, we build libraries and universities. If we believe in the common good, we build parks and public transit systems. The pyramids ask us, what do we believe in? What are we building monuments to? What will our society leave behind for future generations to wonder at? Finally, humility. Standing before the pyramids, you feel small. And that's good occasionally. We should feel small sometimes. It gives us perspective. It reminds us that we're part of something larger and longer than our individual lives. But simultaneously, the pyramids make you feel large. Because humans built these. People like us. With the same brains, the same potential, the same spark of creativity and stubbornness and will. If they could build pyramids with copper tools and wooden sledges, what can we do with all our modern advantages? The pyramids are simultaneously humbling and inspiring. They put us in our place and elevate us to our potential. They say, you are small and temporary and mortal. You are also magnificent and capable of greatness. Both things are true.